Wells Fargo, the largest mortgage servicing company in the country, was recently busted for creating and sharing a handbook that instructed their employees on how to commit fraud. Joining me now to tell us this story is attorney MichaelBurg. So, Michael, this past week, Wells Fargo was already in the middle of one lawsuit, and it came out during that suit that they basically have this handbook, this manual of how to commit fraud. I mean, there's no other way to really put that. They have a manual on how to commit fraud. Tell us this story. This is a very remarkable story that people need to know about.
It is, Farron, but I must tell you, they're not alone. The fraud that's committed in terms of these foreclosures are with all the major banks. But the bombshell that was dropped, that there's a 150-page manual that Wells Fargo issued in November of 2011 and then modified it in February of 2012, which basically tells attorneys how to fake documents, how to put forth fake documents, sign them, endorse them, even though the borrowers may never, or they don't have the original documents, to allow them to go forward with a foreclosure. It's so outrageous, it's unbelievable, but it's been going on since the huge, giant mortgage and housing crisis and the crash that occurred, and it's going on throughout the entire country.
So we've already had, millions of people that have lost their homes since the crash in, late 2007, 2008. And now we're finding out, just as we have through other lawsuits, that a lot of this has been based on fraud. Now, this handbook, these forged documents, what exactly did that entail? What would it allow Wells Fargo to do?
Well, in many different levels. There's an endorsement note that they fill out in blank, which shows the transfer. What happens to these mortgages when you enter into a mortgage, it is unlikely that the original mortgage holder is going to end up with your loan. What they do is they sell these and they package them up and they sell them in bulk and they discount them and other banks take them. But in order for them to foreclose against you, they have to have the original documents. They have to have the note, they have to have the mortgage or the deed of trust, and they have to have a transfer document, an endorsement that endorses it over. And in most cases, those documents either are lost or they're never transferred, and the people doing the banks, the large banks like Wells Fargo, doing the foreclosure don't have them. And so what this book says to the lawyer is here how you put those documents in front of a court to get the foreclosure to go through by phoning them up, faking out blank endorsements, writing them out, forging the notes. It is unbelievable. What people don't understand is this. 49 attorney generals went after almost every major bank, including Wells Fargo. There was a $25 billion settlement for these kinds of fraudulent practices, but nothing to help the homeowners. That's what's so crazy. It's the same thing. I was at a meeting with a guy who was at the Fed who is asked to remain anonymous. And what was amazing is when they did the bailout is that they bailed out the banks. They bailed out Freddie and Fannie. They bailed out the mortgage brokers, but they never bailed out the homeowners. The homeowners are the ones who took the biggest hit, and they could have bailed them out by not allowing these foreclosures to go through in the first place. Had the government taken over the loans and reduced the interest rates, and this was discussed, and I found this out from an anonymous source who won't be revealed at the Fed. They discussed it, that they could reduce the interest rates and allow people to continue to pay on their mortgages. But the big banks were against it. And in order to do that, they would have to have the bank's consent to either nationalize the bank or take over the mortgages, and the banks wouldn't do it. And so what they did instead, which goes to the greed in America and what's going on with these big, giant national banks like Wells Fargo, they said, well, what we'll do is we'll phony up the documents that we don't have, and we're going to put out a handbook about it to basically take the homes of the innocent home buyers who, at the time, because they did those short-term loans, which then when the interest rate rised, they couldn't afford to make the payments anymore. Just outrageous what's going on to the American people.
And in the stories, in it says that these lawyers would refer to these, or they were referred to as these ta-da documents, because they would initially make the court filing, the documents would not be there, and then suddenly, oh, here's the documents, we do have them. And it's because they were fraudulent. They had gone back, they had essentially forged these documents because, again, they knew how. I mean, they might as well have been holding giant weekend training sessions, come to fraud camp, and we'll teach you how to do this. I mean, that's the extent of what's happening here. And a lot of this, we would not know of had initial lawsuits not been filed. And at this point, now that we do know this information, now that we have this very hard evidence that this is what was happening, is there any recourse for the people who were foreclosed upon, or is there any way for them to even know if it was fraud in their case?
First of all, they probably won't know. So you're right there, Farron, that they're not going to know. Their home is gone. They've probably gone through bankruptcy. And they're the ones who basically have been put in a position where they're the ones who are getting the horrible treatment with regard to these fraudulent documents. But I will tell you that as a result of many lawsuits, here in Colorado, for example, we filed a number of lawsuits under this where they didn't find the ta-da documents, where all of a sudden they brought them. And we fortunately had a few judges who said, now, wait a second, I want to find out what's going on. And recently, and it took many years, a number of the lawyers have either been suspended from the practice of law or have had their license taken. And that's what should happen. I mean, not only do we first of all, that we may not be able to get recourse for all those foreclosed homes that have already gone down the road, but those lawyers and these banks have to be held accountable for what they're doing. The lawyers should be disbarred or suspended, because if they participated in falsifying, forgery, and fake documents, they should lose their license, or at least at a minimum be suspended, regardless of what firm they're with, no matter what bank they're with. That should happen, and it should happen right now.
So everything we've talked about, we have forgery, we have filing fake documents in a court. If I were to do that as a person, we're right across the street from the courthouse, if I were to walk over there and say, oh, here's a letter saying that I bought this car, and I completely forged it, and I wanted them to notarize it, I, as a human being, as a person, would go to prison.
You would be in jail.
That is illegal. Now, we have these major banks like Wells Fargo, and as you pointed out earlier, Wells Fargo is certainly not the only one that's done this. I mean, they just happen to be the big ones right now, and we've got their book. But is there any chance at all that anybody at that bank, from the person in the mailroom to the guy at the top of the CEO there, is there any chance any of these guys will get anything more than a slap on the wrist?
Well, if history predicts what's going to happen in the future, unfortunately, the answer is no. The Attorney General of the United States, Attorney General Holder, has basically failed to prosecute. We may find some attorney generals in the state, like, for example, in Minnesota, where we saw a lot of the ta-da documents were actually being produced. We may get something done there, but on a federal government standpoint, they've not sent anybody to jail. If you want to stop the kind of things we've been talking about on this show, and more specifically, this kind of incredibly reckless and horrible, illegal activity, somebody has to go to jail. And that's the only way it's going to work. And rather than paying, I'm sorry, the $25 billion for the banks to pay the fine to the AGs, that's all good and well. But it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't solve the problem, because the only way you're going to have a deterrent effect is sending these people, just like you and I, if we went in like you discussed, we forged a document, we'd be in jail. We'd be prosecuted. I don't care how big the bank is, they need to be prosecuted. Somebody has to be made an example of it so it doesn't happen again.
Well, and what we have, Eric Holder, as you mentioned, he came from corporate law firms. If you look at the roster of clients from Covington and Burling, where he came from, Bank of America is on there. Other big banks and these securities giants who have just committed fraud after fraud after fraud. They're all his former clients. He made tons of money going to court and saying, look, what they did, it's not so bad. And now he is the one who's in charge of going out there and saying, we need to hold these people accountable. And that's why we've seen absolutely none of this hope and change that Obama had promised, because he surrounded himself with these corporate Democrats like Eric Holder, who refuse to do anything about anything. Because Eric Holder knows, 2-3 years from now, he's got to go back to private practice. Where's he going to go? He's probably going right back to Covington Burling, and he can't, hold his friends accountable when he knows in a couple years he's going to be sitting in a courtroom defending them again. And that's the problem I see with the whole situation, is just this massive revolving door.
My partner, Alan Simpson, said to me, you know what, country first. And he's led his life that way. He's a Republican, but country first. More important than money, more important than party, more important than anything. And that's the problem right now. And I'm asking our viewers to get out there, and you write your congressman, your senator, you write the president of the United States, and you write Holder, and you say to him, look, you must hold these people accountable. And whether it's with regard to the securitization and the fraud that occurred on Wall Street, too big to fail, too big to jail, not in America. We can't allow that to happen. And the only way it's going to ever change, because you're right, Holder, he's a Covington guy, he's a big firm guy. Obama, big firm, big corporation guy. It's unbelievable. Even off the subject, Obama has used Williams and Connolly to help vet his judicial appointments, a big giant law firm, to decide whether or not someone's going to go on the federal bench for life. That is disgraceful, and the public has to do something about it. Be outraged by they were allowing these documents to magically appear as a result of forgery and having no one go to jail for it.
Michael, your enthusiasm on this is exactly what every American needs to have right now. They need to be angry. They need to get active. They need to get out there. I certainly appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Fred.